Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast, and I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On this week's podcast, I've invited Rabbanit Yaffah Batya da Costa, founder and CEO of Ezra L'Anousim, back on the podcast to continue our conversation about the Inquisition, anti-Semitism, and the role Christianity has played historically in fueling this ancient hatred. Yaffah, thank you for joining us again on Proclaiming Justice. If you missed the last episode of our conversation with Yaffah, you can find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about Christian anti-Semitism and the Nicene Creed and Constantine, and how the Old Testament, of course, influenced Christian perspective of the Jewish people. Let's discuss the impact of Constantine, the Nicene Creed, the early Catholic Church. Yaffah, welcome back to Proclaiming Justice.
Thank you, Laurie, so very, very much. I really enjoy doing these programs with you, and I think it's very, very important to explain some of these dimensions of Christianity to people, because in most cases, people have never learned this information from their pastors and their teachers, but it's historical what we're talking about. So it's very, very important to do this.
Absolutely. So we've been at PJTN, I've been researching for years, just compiling information about the early church fathers and how when the early followers of Jesus who were Jewish, who kept the Torah, when these early church fathers became, the Greco-Roman leadership started to rise up or come up in the church, we saw a lot of historically anti-Semitic views, especially after the Gospels were written. And one of the things I've been concerned about and have been following, read a book about Constantine called Constantine's Sword years ago, but my concern has been about the influence of the early Catholic Church. Constantine, who was the founder of Christianity, he's the one that we credit for starting the Christian faith. But in 325, the Nicene Creed was drafted. And this document has been a document used not just by the Catholic Church, and many Catholics who are listening to this will remember the Nicene Creed, because in the Catholic Church every Sunday, the Nicene Creed is repeated by the congregants in their prayers. But the Nicene Creed also, with Constantine adopting this Nicene Creed, it also played a role in influencing anti-Semitism, including anti-Semitism that we see today, because the anti-Semitism and the Nicene Creed wasn't just the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church didn't just adopt it. There are also other Protestant faiths, like the Episcopal Church, who also adopted the Nicene Creed. Now, today, we see the impact and the influence of that document, that historical document, and the impact it has had on the congregants of the Catholic Church and some of the other Protestant faiths as well. So, Yaffah, tell our audience about Constantine's role in fueling this Jew hatred that we've seen that came out of the Nicene Creed.
Okay. You know, Constantine was the emperor of Rome at that time. And he liked Christianity because it promoted the idea of one God. And at that time, the Roman people were pagans, as most people are aware, and they worshipped multiple gods. And as Rome occupied and conquered various territories and brought them in to the Roman Empire, they would accept the god of those people, the pagan god of those people, and added it to the list of all the others. Okay, so that's what existed before Constantine changed it and said no. And by the way, the pagan multi-god theory at the time was also losing subscribers, so to speak, losing people interested in that because the gods would fight with each other according to their followers and that kind of thing. So Constantine really liked this idea of a one God,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted Christianity to be the religion of the empire. Okay, and it goes into a story about how that happened. But just to say, he decided he wanted Christianity to replace all the other pagan stuff. But he had a problem. The problem was he wanted to unite the empire under a one God religion. But in
Mm-hmm.
that one God religion, there were multiple views. Okay? So how could he unite the empire under Christianity if Christianity also had, you know, people fighting with each other and arguing or discussing or whatever? So he set up the Nicene Council to solve that issue. And there were two major theories or thoughts at that time, two major subsects, if you will, of Roman Christianity. I always like to say Roman Christianity because there were multiple Christianities. You really want to get into it. But the Greco-Roman version, I call it, of Christianity had two major subsets. One that followed the teaching of Athanasius, if I'm saying his name correctly, who was in Alexandria, Egypt, who became a bishop eventually, and this man named Arius, and his followers were called Arians. And so the dispute was about whether Jesus was fully God in the sense of God the Father and equal, like co-equal to God, which of course is very different from the Jewish view, as you know, or whether he, Jesus of Nazareth, was a created being, okay, and had some form of divinity. I mean, they didn't disallow, the Arians didn't allow that he had some kind of divinity or divine nature or whatever, but he was not co-equal with God, co-equal in nature and substance and all the other stuff. Well, so they had this council and they discussed this issue because it was a major issue. A lot of people following both sides. And enough, the other guy, the non-Arian position won. So what did they do? I mean, they couldn't have two gods. They couldn't have God the Father, as he's called, and Jesus refers to him, and Paul refers to him as God the Father. They couldn't have that entity or that being be God, and then Jesus having some kind of just divine status or stature or whatever, and not be co-equal, because now you got two. And Constantine put his foot down and he said, one God, one and only one. This is what the Torah says, of course, too, by the way. There's one and only one. Rak
Right.
Echad in Hebrew. Okay. Now I don't think he cared so much about the Jewish view, but that's what his foot was down on. I only want you to come up with one God. So they came up with this concept, this idea of one God with three persons all equal to each other. And by the way, even Jesus said at some point, and I could go and look it up and we can talk about it on another podcast. At some point, he said only the Father knows, not even the Son, on some particular matter. Well, and Jesus is quoted as saying that. So if he didn't know something that the Father knew, then how could he be co-equal? But that's a sideline, you know. But anyway, they came up with that creed. But the worst part of it wasn't so much that that's what they decided on, because the Arians could have gone off and have their own version of Christianity, like there's many forms of Protestantism today. You have Roman Catholics, but then you have the Protestant or protesting churches and many different forms of that today. I mean, it could have all been, fine, but Constantine wouldn't allow it. And what they further did was they said, okay, after they decided in 381, okay, because they're back and forth for a few decades between an emperor being pro-Arian and an emperor being pro-Anastasio, whatever his name is, the bishop. So finally, in 381 of the Common Era, they decided, okay, it's a Nicene Creed. That's it. That's Christianity for the whole Roman Empire. And if people want to follow Arius, if they're Arian in their view, it's a capital offense punishable by death. That's how they forced it on the whole Roman Empire. And the Arians died out, of course, because they were slaughtered. Okay, they were sent to the slaughter because of their views. It was made a capital crime. So they didn't survive. It's like the Nazarene Jews didn't survive. Okay, either, because once they saw where Christianity was going, I mean, in the beginning, in the first century, with Paul being the apostle to the Gentiles, and James and Peter and John being the apostles, if you will, I want to use that term, to the Jews, they were the leaders of the Nazarene sect. They never were called Christians. The term Christian was used for the Gentiles that Paul was teaching in Asia Minor. Okay, so Christianity, from a Pauline point of view, okay, was for Gentiles. And then you had the Jewish sect of the Nazarenes, who obviously, again, also believed in one God, only one, right? Rakakad in Hebrew, okay? But what happened was, when they saw the way Christianity was going under the Greco-Roman influence of the Church Fathers, which started in the early 2nd century, and how it ended up with the Nicene Creed and the whole Roman Empire going in that direction of, and by the way, if you don't believe in this, you're going to hell, because that was taught. Okay, that was the whole Roman Empire of you have to believe in this or you're damned. So what happened to the Nazarene sect? They went back into Judaism. They went back into traditional Judaism. Jesus of Nazareth did not fulfill what he said he was going to do. And coming back, even in that generation, people who were alive at that time, okay, so they started to even have doubts about whether he really was the Mashiach or not. And eventually they went back into normative Judaism, which the only kind of Judaism that was left after the Roman Jewish wars was Pharisaical Judaism. Okay, a sect of the Pharisees went out. The Sadducees were gone, the Essenes were gone, the Sicarii were gone, the rebels were gone, all the others were gone. The Pharisees of Shammai were gone. It was only the Pharisees of Hillel that were left. Okay, so they would have crept back into those communities, and said, okay, yeah, we weren't correct, we weren't right about thinking this person was the Jewish Messiah of the end of the age, by the way, because it's prophesied that somebody would come by Moses himself, and we can talk about that if you want. But the point is, that's who they thought he was, but it didn't pan out that way, except that the Greco-Romans took what started off as a really good thing for the Roman Empire and made it into something totally different and forced it on the entire population, including the anti-Semitism was forced on the entire population.
So the Nicene Creed, how did that document help to fuel this new anti-Semitism? And just another comment I want to make is, was Constantine behind establishing the Trinity?
No. The guy that was responsible, who started it, even said the word the first time, was Tertullian. Yeah. If you go into his writings, he's one of the Church Fathers. He's the first one to have used the term Trinity. And that's where it started. Okay. But again, it's the Church Fathers. And the Church Fathers, again, they're Greco-Roman, former pagan, and they had a couple of views that was not consistent with the Nazarene sect, which was straight out of Judaism and the Hebrew Bible. Okay. One idea is God is one, literally one, unitary, singular, not multiples of anything. Okay. And the second idea in Judaism that existed in Paul's day and in Pauline Christianity, but the Greco-Romans didn't care for it either, okay, was they felt that to worship a god, there had to be a physical presence, a physical form. They needed physicality. The Greco-Romans did, and all of their gods had physicality, and they had statues to them, and they looked like humans, okay? And they made their emperors
Right.
to gods, and they had temples to the gods all over the Roman Empire, okay, with these statues of Zeus and Apollo and this one and that one, right? So in their mind, which went all the way back to Egypt, by the way, God had to have some kind of physical form. In Judaism, God does not have a physical form. And Jesus of Nazareth himself is quoted in the Gospels. He's quoted as saying about God, God is spirit and is to be worshipped in spirit and in truth. Well, there's no physicality there.
Right.
Jesus himself said so. So what I'm trying to say is this Greco-Roman view was very different from the Jewish view of God the Creator, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay. And even Jesus, of course, who was not just a Jew, he was a Torah observant Jew, and he promoted Torah and was Torah himself oriented, and Paul as well. So what happened was there was this schism that happened, promoted by the Greco-Roman Church Fathers as early as the early part of the 2nd century. Okay? And they got into Christianity, but they didn't like certain parts of it, and they wanted to change it, and they did.
So Constantine, I've read that he had killed members of his family.
Mhm.
Is there any truth to that? And that his conversion to Christianity was not immediate. It was actually on his deathbed.
That's what I understand. Correct. He wanted the religion for the benefit of the Romans, the Roman Empire. Okay? He wanted them to get away from paganism, which he didn't like. And again, there were problems with that. So he looked at the various options that he had and chose Christianity. By the way, there were at that time, and for the few hundred years or so after Paul, there were some very good things that were a part of Christianity that was different from the way the Romans viewed people. They treated slaves horribly, they treated women horribly, not as equals. And when Christianity started coming out to the Roman Empire, there were a lot of positive aspects of it. Again, treating all people the same, with love and respect, etc., giving alms, taking and giving charity for the poor. There were even Paul, raised money for the community in Jerusalem of the Jews, the Nazarene sect. So there were various aspects of Christianity that were very palatable and very different from the paganism, of course, one God, of course, as opposed to multiple gods. So Constantine, I think, had the right idea, but I don't think he understood, aside from he wanted to get this issue resolved of the two major sects. He didn't want, to have two major kinds of Christianity. I don't think he understood really how much Christianity of the Greco-Roman version was so different from the Pauline version, okay, which was based on the Hebrew Bible, and Paul quoted the Hebrew Bible, Jesus quoted the Hebrew Bible. I don't think he understood really what he was doing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, interesting because
He saw it was popular. He saw it was popular, and he liked the idea of one God.
Mhm. So how do you perceive that the Nicene Creed helped to influence even the anti-Semitism that we see today? Because I see people who are Catholic, and of course I was raised Catholic, but I see people who are engaged in the Catholic faith. One person comes to mind, prominent person, Candace Owens, who has the crucifix during her interviews, has the crucifix on a mantle behind her. So she's portraying her Catholic faith and how that faith is important to what she does. I mean, she's got the crucifix there, right there on the set with her. But what is it that within the Catholic Church, is it the Nicene Creed that continues to fuel the anti-Semitism, the Jew hatred that we see today? What is it about that document that you believe is inciting the continued, even in this generation, the continued hatred of Jews?
So I don't think it's the Nicene Creed at all that is doing the incitement. I think it's the Greco-Roman, which it comes from, of course,
Hmm.
the Empire in a
Right.
late period, the Greco-Roman cancel culture of forcing a view on people that don't share it
Hmm.
and of making it so intolerable for them that they either have to adopt the view or they could be harassed or they could lose their job or they could have trouble in the workplace through harassment or people would be constantly after them, to change their mind, or they could actually be killed. Now, there was a period of time in the world, the Catholic world, where people were absolutely persecuted and even slaughtered as Jews because they had a different view of God the Creator. And it was all based on the Hebrew Bible, which nascent Christianity, which is equivalent to Pauline Christianity, I go back and forth in using those two terms, was absolutely with the Hebrew Bible and with the original understanding of God the Creator as one God and not a human being as a God to be worshipped as God. Okay? So what happened was when the Greco-Romans took over Christianity, made it according to their liking, but they kind of blended that, if you will, with the arrogance that said, and you're going to believe in this or you're dead. Or later they softened that and said, you're going to believe in this or you're going to hell. Now, there are 4 tools of cancel culture that the Romans used, because cancel culture, people talk about it today and they'll drop that term, but
Hmm.
they don't necessarily know how far back it goes in history. It goes back to the Roman Empire. Okay, and the 4 tools of cancel culture, and I wrote a book on this. The first one is censorship. There were magistrates in the Roman Empire that had that title, censor, and they counted the people, they counted the property, the amount of money that people had in order to levy taxes. But they also did this thing of reviewing manuscripts and scrolls and all kinds of documents of the day, the way they were being, distributed, whatever, to see if they liked it or not, if it was pro-Roman or not. If it wasn't, they
Hmm.
got rid of it, and the person who wrote it maybe, so there was a risk, right? So they actually performed censorship of information. Second tool of cancel culture is propaganda. And so they would produce information that was pro-Roman. Okay. And some of the stuff that's in the later Gospels is definitely along those lines of being propaganda because it's pro-Roman. Why? Because the author of those later Gospels wanted to make sure their scrolls got through the censors and the censorship. Okay. So
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So they made it very pro-Roman. The third, I'll just do very quickly the other two. The third
Hmm.
um, cancel culture tool is character assassination. Okay, where you assassinate the character of an individual and put out lies about them or whatever. Okay, to bring their reputation down, even bring them down from a high position. Look what they tried to do with President Trump all the time. Okay,
Right.
character assassination in a political sense, which also existed in the Roman era, by the way, Roman Empire, which I won't go into that story. And then the fourth tool of cancel culture is violence and even murder to get rid of your enemies, to get rid of your dissenters, people who don't agree with you. Okay, and that's exactly what the Romans did with the Arians.
And that's exactly what we're watching happen today.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So there's a long history of this, and I think people's belief, doctrinal belief, or any other kinds of belief are a matter of personal choice and conscience, and it shouldn't be forced, never should have been forced. There never should have been forced conversions of our ancestors. You and I are both from the Sephardi world, and there
Hmm.
never should have been forcing of anything around religion or religious practices or this or that or the other because it's just totally wrong to do that. People
Hmm.
have rights. Now, in the United States, okay, allegedly, I say that with tongue in cheek, people are supposed to have freedom of religion. Here in Israel, too, of course. People are supposed to have freedom of religion. But do they really, if they're paying so much of a price, a heavy price, in terms of synagogues, people in synagogues being shot, okay, and other kinds of things, which I won't mention all the dirty, nasty stuff that's going on. And
Right.
also workplace. The ADL just produced a report about anti-Semitism in the workplace now, hiring
Mm.
practices and all kinds of stuff. So the thing is, it's wrong. It's a sin against God and against his people, okay? And just people haven't been taught properly, haven't been taught correctly. So if someone chooses, if someone does the research and they choose the doctrinal aspect of Roman Catholicism or Protestantism version of Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or Islam or anything, they should have a right to make that choice, because who gave everyone free will to make choices in their life? God himself. So why would
Right.
anyone feel that they have the ability or the right to take away someone else's free will by forcing something on them that they don't choose for themselves? It's totally wrong. But this is what's going on. And by the way, Islam got its version of forcing their beliefs and their doctrinal whatever from Christianity, who had done it. So Christianity became
Right.
supersessionist, and no one else could have beliefs that were opposed to Christian beliefs of that time, of the
Mm.
Nicene Council. But then Islam did the same thing later in the 7th century, okay, when they created the Quran and other stuff under Islam and started going around conquering like the Romans had done, and taking over territory, taking over the people, and forcing them to become
Right.
Muslims. I mean, they did the same thing.
Mhm. Well, going back to getting back to the Nicene Creed as we wrap up our interview today, there is a line in the Nicene Creed that says that we believe in um, one God, maker of heaven and earth. So I find it interesting, even though Constantine wasn't a follower of Judaism or the Hebrew foundation of Christianity, he did communicate that there is only one God. He's the one true God, maker of heaven and earth. At least he acknowledged him. So it's very interesting. Your closing thought, any closing thoughts uh, before we wrap up this program, and um, what your thoughts are for the audience today with regards to, what we can take away about Constantine as one of the early church fathers and his role and the influence of anti-Semitism that came out of that period of time that is influencing the anti-Semitism even that we see today. Because honestly, Yafa, I have to tell you, I look at the people like Candace Owens who has become viciously anti-Semitic. She is practicing in the Catholic faith. She has a far different um, perspective than what I had coming out of the Catholic Church and always having an affinity to the Jewish people and to Israel. It's hard to understand Catholics that come out that are, vehemently anti-Semitic. So I always wonder, what is it? What is the root of the problem that is influencing these people to hate the Jews so much?
Well, the situation goes like this. Even though the Roman Catholic Church, Greco-Roman, in their coming up with the Nicene Creed, decided that opposers to that creed were guilty of a criminal offense and were worthy of death,
Mm.
okay, it never went away. And the Jews never went away. And the Albigensians and the Waldensians and other so-called heretics, defined as heretics of the Roman Catholic Church, they never really went away. So there was always this sense of those aren't just enemies, they're our
Mhm.
competition. And we have to keep our people, especially before the Bible was produced and printed where people could read it for themselves. The monks and the friars and the priests in the Catholic Church were the ones who taught people whatever they wanted people to learn and not teach them anything they didn't want them to learn. And, in some of the church fathers, they were even so vitriolic against the Jews that no one would even ever dare go and appear at a synagogue to find out for themselves, doing their own little research like people do today all the time, doing their own independent research about Jews and what do Jews believe. And we've got all kinds of stuff out on social media, and rabbis and rabbanim, rabbinites, women married to rabbis, putting out YouTube videos and all kinds of information out on the internet. I mean, it's a smorgasbord of all kinds of information people could want. So for people who don't believe in Vatican II and don't believe in Nostra Aetate, okay, the Jews, as the Pope said at that time in 1965, the Jews are our elder brother in the faith of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They cannot be considered guilty, every single one of them for all these years for, what happened with Jesus of Nazareth. They don't accept that. There are other people that I watch that don't accept that either. They don't accept Vatican II. And they want the church to go back to pre-Vatican II, okay, and telling the world, no, this is, and by the way, the current new Pope might be there. I don't know yet about him. I'm really kind of iffy where he's going to end up. But there are definitely Roman Catholics that are saying, we don't accept Vatican II. That was a mistake. That never should have happened. These good relationships between Catholics and Jews and everything. And no. We're going to go out there and we're going to proclaim Christ as king. And we don't care who doesn't like it and who doesn't like hearing they're going to hell if they don't accept it. No, this is the position. Absolutely. That's the arrogance again. They have the right to force their views onto other people.
Right.
That's totally arrogant.
Right. Well, this is important, and especially for our audience that's tuning in today and listening to this this interview. This is a tremendous anomaly within Christianity, and we do know about as Yaffah just mentioned, about Nostra Aetate, and that the Catholic Church decided to right the wrongs of Catholic history. And so I'm delighted to hear, your thoughts about this, and I hope this helps our Catholic, especially our Catholic audience, to understand, because I know there are many Catholics that I've talked to that it troubles them to hear the viciousness of how Candace Owens talks about or treats the Jewish community in her posts, in her blog posts. It's shocking. But I think this will bring comfort to a lot of people to know that, the teaching of many people have taken history and rewritten history, especially when it pertains to the Jewish people, and they continue to push the lies and the hatred against our Jewish brethren. But the Catholic Church, as I said, the Catholic Church has done a lot in recent years, especially since Nostra Aetate, to try to correct the wrongs. Now, there have been popes like the last one that we didn't agree with his policies and his comments about Israel. But yes, we will have to wait to see how Pope Leo, how he handles his position and how he handles the relationship, the unique and special relationship that we have with our Jewish communities, with our Jewish brethren around the world. Yaffah, thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
Very quickly. I think part of the problem in Christianity at large, Catholic or Protestant, is people following church doctrine rather than teachings of Jesus.
Good point.
Because many, many years ago, there were people who would call someone a red letter believer. Do you know that? Did I talk about that before? Yes?
I don't know if you've talked about it, but yeah, I'm familiar with that term.
Okay. In Catholic Bibles, it was common that the words of Jesus of Nazareth would be put in red. Okay, red letters, and then the rest were black. Everything was on white. So they would call an individual red letter believer if the only thing they believed in and wanted to fashion, their life and their lifestyle over or around was the words of Jesus, okay, who taught love, who taught mercy and compassion, who taught about Hashem, taught Torah. So they were called red letter believers. Even if they believed he was the Messiah, it didn't matter. And they were put down for it, and they were, mocked and all kinds of stuff. But to be honest with you, that's another issue within the church that never went away, okay? And again, the church at large, Christianity at large, is, do you follow the doctrines of the organization and its authorities, whether ancient or current, and what the pastor was teaching, okay? Or do you read your Bible and you believe in Jesus because you believe in what he taught? That's what you believe in, is what he taught, okay? And there are Christians like that, absolutely, including Catholics, that are like that, and they want, and even Elon Musk's son, young son, was talking about this the other day. I saw it on a video. He was talking about, Dad, I don't understand. If people say they believe in Jesus, how come there's so much of this, that, and the other negative stuff, and not enough of A, B, and C of what he taught? His little son was talking about
Yeah.
it. Okay.
I saw that. That was amazing. Out of the mouth of babes.
I know. So this is another major thing in Christianity, major difference is in people being vitriolic and so nasty and negative, right, etc., like you're mentioning this person, okay, and what they teach and how they treat other people. Wait a minute, where did Jesus ever say that? As a matter of fact, in Matthew chapter 25, and there are some people calling themselves this, Matthew 25 believers, and he's talking about separating the sheep from the goats, depending on how they treat others. Laurie, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Putting that woman and what she's doing and how she's talking about people or to people, whatever, in the context of what Jesus of Nazareth himself said about the end of the age and who is going to merit the next world and who will not be thrown away, the goats, because they didn't do, and they give specific examples of how they're treating other people. I mean, it just blows me away that this woman doesn't even know what she's doing in that context of Matthew.
Oh yeah, the Lord said, there will be those who come to me saying, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy and cast out demons in your name? And he said, I will throw them into outer darkness, for they basically didn't speak on his behalf. They said, Lord, Lord, will we cast out demons in your name? And he will say, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. And that word iniquity refers to the Torah. Those of you workers of iniquity. And most Christians they read that and it goes right over their heads. If Jesus is going to say to them, depart from me, for I did not know you, you workers of iniquity, I would be very frightened by people like Candace, who makes these statements, these horrible statements about Israel, about the Jews. It's just, I don't think people follow. It seems to me, and dealing with Christianity for many, many years, obviously, again, being raised in the Catholic faith and the Protestant faith, it seems to me that there are many Christians who think they're following Jesus's teaching. They're following Paul. Paul is confusing. It can be confusing, but they're following Paul, and they're not reading those red letters, those red words in the Bible, in their text of scripture, and hearing what Jesus said. Because
you're right. So can I actually do the detail of sheep and goats?
Absolutely.
This is chapter 25, starting at verse 31 of Matthew. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right hand, or right, and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous, and hold on to that word, I'm going to get back to that word at the end. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of these, the least of my brothers and sisters, you did for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then he will say, those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, he's talking about his brethren, you did not do for me.
Right.
Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal. So righteousness is very important. Now, Paul is correct that salvation is based on grace through faith. Faith is the foundation, but faith leads to righteousness. And lastly, he said to the Pharisees, he said to his followers, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So he made a big deal about righteousness, and a righteous person is one who repents of their sins. What is sin? For the Jews, it's the Torah from Har Sinai, and for the non-Jews, it's the moral code and the Ten Commandments, whichever people want to phrase that in.
Right.
So people need to do that. But yes, faith is the foundation, and we are designated by God as people who, he says, it's justification. God is right to give us salvation, meaning the next world, okay, based only on our faith. But that's not enough, because even James said faith without works is dead. So it's a lot of things that people don't understand about the context of where all this comes from, which is the Hebrew Bible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I so appreciate you taking the time to share all of this information with us. And as we continue to dig deeper and try to understand, again, the text of Scripture and what our responsibility is as believers to stand with Israel and the Jewish people against this rise of anti-Semitism. And we've got to study history in order to know our destiny and our future. And we've been raised up for such a time as this, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found this program informative. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about our responsibility as watchmen. When we see the enemy advancing, it is our duty to sound the alarm so that no innocent individual is killed. But I'm asking you, ladies and gentlemen, please share and like this podcast to help sound the alarm in your community. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue our conversation with Batya about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I also just want to remind you that if you haven't signed up to become a watchman, You can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs just like this one for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.